Welcome to episode 5 of the podcast. I'm David Bernard, and today we are going to be talking about Hurricane Laura. It's been just about 7 months since Laura made landfall in Southwest Louisiana, a strong Category 4, almost a Category 5 storm, one of the strongest on record to ever hit Southwest Louisiana and the state of Louisiana for that matter. And we're going to talk with two different meteorologists today. One, Zack Fradella, who you may be familiar with. He's a fellow meteorologist at Fox 8 in New Orleans. And then also Ben Terry. Ben is the morning meteorologist at KPLC in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Both of them have stories to tell, particularly Ben. Zack was involved in our coverage leading up to the storm and went over to Lake Charles to help with them, and was also part of the evacuation of the station, a rather dramatic story that Ben is going to tell as they all moved their coverage to Baton Rouge, because once it became clear that Laura was going to be such a severe hurricane that no one was going to be able to stick around for that. So on that note, let's bring in meteorologist Zack Fradella. All right, I'm excited to have Fox 8 meteorologist Zack Fradella with me today. Zack, it's your first time on the podcast. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It is my first time on the David Bernard podcast. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I thought it was more than appropriate to have you as a guest today. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking to Ben Terry, the morning meteorologist at KPLC in Lake Charles. And we're talking about Hurricane Laura. Of course, just in the past week or so, the World Meteorological Organization retired Laura as a name. No surprise there that was going to be the case. And of course, we wanted your perspective today because you're kind of in the middle of it as this storm was making landfall, and the station was sending you to help out in Lake Charles and Baton Rouge because you worked at KPLC in Lake Charles for a few years. You're from New Orleans, but you started your broadcast career in Southwest Louisiana, so you have a unique perspective, of course, on all of this. When I think back to this past season, I mean, we're going to be talking about this season for years. It was just incredible on so many levels, and Laura was definitely one of the more exceptional storms. It's the strongest hurricane on record to hit Southwest Louisiana, the only known Category 4 since 1851 to strike the coastline there. And one of the more interesting aspects of the storm, and something that's becoming all too familiar, the way the intensity wrapped up so quickly with this storm. 65 mile per hour increase in just 24 hours. And it was strengthening all the way to landfall. According to Phil Klotzbach, the researcher at Colorado State University, that was the most rapid intensifying storm in the Gulf since Hurricane Carl in 2010. What are some of your thoughts on the meteorology behind this?
You know, the interesting part is a lot of people, I think, forget because of what Laura became in the end result of its landfall in Southwest Louisiana. It was a tropical storm when it entered the Gulf. When it moved off of Cuba, it was a tropical storm. And then you just talked about it. We're seeing more and more of these rapid intensification of storms in the Gulf, warm water, perfect environment. And there you go. You go from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane by the time it actually made landfall in Southwest Louisiana. And a lot of people, I think in our lifetime, in the recent lifetime, everybody in Southwest Louisiana judges hurricanes almost on Audrey. Audrey was back in the 60s. But remember, it was actually a Cat 4 supposedly, but in recent times they've downgraded it. When they do their reanalysis of storms, they brought it back down to a Category 3. So yes, Laura is the strongest hurricane to impact Southwest Louisiana ever in recorded history, and the strongest, or ties that 1856 Last Island hurricane as the strongest as far as the wind goes for Louisiana.
Yeah, it's interesting. The winds sustained 150 miles per hour at landfall, tying the Last Island hurricane that you're referring to. And the next strongest on record to strike Louisiana, Betsy, at 130 miles per hour, as well as the Chenier Caminada. And then Katrina, right behind that. There's a bunch of storms that have made landfall at Katrina's wind speed at 125 miles per hour. I think you talk about the rapid intensification. And another example, of course, was Michael in 2018 that did the same thing. And I was looking up some of the statistics here. There's only 4 other storms that have hit the United States since 1851 with higher sustained winds than Laura did. The Labor Day hurricane of 1935 that was devastating in the Florida Keys, Category 5, Camille, Andrew, and Michael in 2018. The wind statistics were quite impressive with Laura.
Yeah, I mean, one of the recorded wind gusts along the coast, as far as in Cameron Parish, was actually from Holly Beach, 154 miles per hour wind gust. The Lake Charles Regional Airport, which is actually in South Lake Charles, it's south of the interstate, it recorded a wind gust to 133 miles per hour. Now, whether that is totally accurate from the, because remember we started losing everything, including the radar site there. I mean, the radar site just got blown to pieces. When you start to get winds over 130 miles per hour, most anemometers just can't handle that type of wind. And one thing to go back to, as far as you named, Betsy was the second strongest for Louisiana behind those, which is now Laura and the last island hurricane. As far as the wind speeds go, you see that huge jump, that huge difference between 130 and 150. It goes to show you how rare Laura really was, because there's not many storms in between there. There's actually none. But when you jump that much, when you get closer to that strong Cat 4, almost Cat 5 status, that's why the wind impacts in Southwest Louisiana were so bad and so terrible. And at first, people were like, "Oh, we didn't see much water. That's a good thing." But once they started going out and realizing the wind damage, it's like, whoa, a hurricane. This was a wind hurricane, and it was a severe one at that.
And we're going to talk to Ben Terry some more about the storm surge with Laura, what some of the fears were for Lake Charles regarding that, why some of that didn't materialize. But there was a major surge, 17 feet with Laura. They found that at Rutherford Beach and near Creole, Louisiana, about the same level there. Pretty amazing statistics. They had over 1 million people under some type of evacuation during the course of Hurricane Laura's lifetime, and more than 900,000 customers lost power, and that was deep into North Louisiana. This storm was producing hurricane force winds almost across the entire western and northern part of the state. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and bring in meteorologist Ben Terry from KPLC. All right, Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be. I appreciate you inviting me on the show today, and looking forward to some good discussion.
Well, it's hard to believe. It's been just over 6 months since Laura. Zack and I were talking. Of course, they just retired. Laura is the name. No surprise there. But I had to ask you right out of the gate. You got to experience something that not a lot of broadcasters do and not a lot of people do. What was your feelings, both personally and professionally, when you were staring at Laura, a strong Category 4, nearly a Category 5, aimed right at your TV market, Southwest Louisiana?
Well, it's one of those things to where you see hurricanes in the Gulf, and we've had these rapidly intensifying storms, but you always feel like, well, maybe it'll miss us again, or it's not going to hit, or there's a little chance it could move one way or the other. But with Laura, we were looking at a storm that was still intensifying, had a potential to become a Category 5 at the rate it was intensifying, and it was getting to the point to where it looked like we were not going to be able to escape this. It's going to do some catastrophic damage to our area, whether it hits a few miles east or west. That window of time was getting close, and we had to make some fast decisions about what to do planning wise for ourselves, our station, and then of course the point, it got to the point to where it became just very important for us to convey to the public that you have the chance to still get out while you have the time. I think part of what made it a lot easier for our area to evacuate was we did have that window of time, all the way up until really before the sun was setting in the evening. As crazy as it sounded, to get out, to make those last efforts, because we didn't have large areas trying to evacuate like Houston or Lafayette, like we saw with Delta, which was a whole different nightmare with the evacuation. So it allowed people to leave really up until that last minute. And but as far as a planning standpoint from our station, we had been in several meetings days and days before the storm, going through what we were going to do as a station, stay in the building or leave, or what was the plan. Because I think anybody that's a broadcaster, and you guys can know about this as well, you never want to have to leave, in a high impact storm. You want to be there for your viewers who expect you to be there and be on the air. And so that's not something that you ever really want to have to do. It became necessary, because we were getting all these we were getting all these reports from the National Weather Service and the Hurricane Center, about the risk for storm surge flooding. And if you're not familiar with where our station is located, we're in downtown, just a few feet away from the lake. So we're not in a very good position for flooding. We had the potential to take in, 4 to 6 feet of water in the building. That was a possibility.
Well,
little did we know that the tower was going to come down.
Okay, we are going to get into all of that for sure. But let's step back from that for a minute because I want to dive into this just a little bit more. I've done big storms. I've not done a landfalling storm of that intensity on a local level. I have on a national level. Did you feel prepared as a broadcaster to deliver this kind of dire information? I mean, intellectually, we go through the process in our head if we're faced with a catastrophic storm like this, and how would we communicate it. But when it actually came time for that to happen, how did you feel about your ability, and is there anything that you might have done different?
Well, I think you kind of have to, for this instance, throw everything out that you might have tried to rehearse before, because we were in a situation now to where you had to get really on the personal level, because we knew that this was going to be a catastrophic storm, and just trying to relay that information in a way that people could understand and really take heed of the fact that we're being serious about this. Because I'm not a person that hypes things up. Our area has been through storms in the past with Hurricane Rita. These people that live here are already, having been through storms. We don't need to tell them, how dangerous a hurricane is. People understand that. But when we get on the air, we start putting out these dire messages about leaving. That's not something I would have done, in a situation where I felt like it would not have been a life or death situation, really, for a lot of people if they had decided to stay after the fact, looking back at the damage that was done to these homes. So you kind of had to put it on a personal level and just think back, like describe things as to what could possibly happen. Like, for instance, I was talking about, before you leave, take a picture of your house, because it's not going to look the same when you come back. Look at the trees, look at the landscape, how beautiful we are here in Southwest Louisiana, because it's going to look a whole lot different. And I think that was what that message was beginning to, be received by the public, in a situation where people may have decided that they were going to stay or ride out the storm. I had several viewers after the storm was over tell me that, it was those last ditch efforts we were making to get people out that, made us decide to leave. And it was, the afternoon before it made landfall that a lot of people decided to leave. So.
Well, and I kind of want to bring Zack in here a little bit, and he's going to talk about his experience going to Lake Charles and then sort of being at the station with you. So you started to allude to the station's hurricane plan. What normally was supposed to happen during a hurricane emergency at KPLC in Lake Charles?
Well, we've been through hurricanes in past, like for instance with Hurricane Rita. The contingency plan was for us to relocate, and that's what happened to a local hospital. We had Christa St. Patrick Hospital, where we were located on the 3rd floor during that, and KPLC stayed on the air for the duration of that storm, and it was largely because of the flooding concerns that we would have in the building and getting people to a higher location. Well, this was a little different this year with COVID. We had reached out to the hospital about potentially using that building again to broadcast from. There are some logistical issues. In Rita, we were an analog broadcast. We weren't digital, so it was a lot different. The way we transmit our signal is a lot different than it is now. So getting those technical aspects of things worked out as to how we would remotely, keep our signal on the air was a challenge. But then with COVID, we were pretty much limited to the hospital facility. They were only going to let us on the 1st floor, so we decided that was not going to be really any safer than staying in the building at that point, because that's still going to be susceptible to flooding, if not even worse, over where the hospital is located, closer to the lake. So that was kind of thrown out the window. So we had a whole set of challenges for us. We actually had a new news director who started just a couple. Well, he started in July, right before the storm. So this was a big event for him, being unfamiliar with the area, trying to just get things into perspective as to what the hazards were with the staffing. We need to stay in this building or leave, because it really became, and Zack will tell you because he was there, a dire situation of us, having to decide to leave, because at that point that was the only safe option we had. So, staying in Lake Charles at the point we got to in the afternoon, it became real to us that we're on the air trying to tell people to leave, but we also need to be leaving because this
So
is not going to be a good outcome.
I want to bring Zack in at this point. Okay, Zack, I'm gonna let you kind of take it over here, but Zack, why don't you start by saying, what happened to you on that day? And we're talking about, I guess, the 26th, right? This was the day before landfall, or maybe it was the 25th or the
It was the
26th.
day of. I think,
Right.
but I think it made
The
land.
storm came in on the 27th, I think at 1 or 2 in the morning. So
Yeah.
anyway, tell us what happened, and then bring in Ben on this conversation and what you guys did.
Yeah, well, a day in advance, we spoke to the news director at KPLC, and they were like, I'm familiar with the area. Let's bring in another meteorologist to where, because at that point they only had three, so we had four meteorologists to kind of guide through the storm. So I woke up that morning, got in one of our Fox 8 vehicles in New Orleans, and drove all the way to Lake Charles. Now, remember, the storm was still not a strong Cat 4 at that point. It was really, that 12 to 18 hours before landfall that the storm did a lot of its intensification. So we were going from a Cat 2, borderline Cat 3. Chances are, okay, we're going to ride that storm out. I'm going to have to go ride that storm out in Lake Charles and help the people in Lake Charles get through it. Then all of a sudden, as I'm driving and I basically make it to Lake Charles and make it to the studio, it's now a strong Cat 4 trying to be a borderline Cat 5. And that's when things sort of, it all of a sudden becomes, look, I remember walking into the studio with Ben, and Ben's on air at that point, and the things that he's saying, and you realize from my perspective, I went from New Orleans, which you're telling people, hey, the storm's going our west, we're going to have small impacts, but overall it's not going to be a big deal for us. And then you're walking into a situation where you have an entire viewing area that you need to warn that this is going to be almost a storm of a lifetime. And that's where, Ben was doing an incredible job in the studio at that point. But then it also became, what do we need to do? I mean, so I literally drove all the way to Lake Charles, and 1 or 2 hours later, we were in the car heading to Baton Rouge to broadcast.
So what? And Ben and Zack, either one of you can answer this though. Before you got in the car and the station decided to evacuate employees to Baton Rouge to our sister station there, WAFB. What kind of went into that decision-making process? I mean, you're looking around at the physical building itself. You're looking at storm surge models. And Ben, I want you to also talk about that, about how there was fear that there could be significant water in Lake Charles and why that didn't materialize. So either one of you kind of start in on that. And I also want Ben to touch on eventually, what happened to you personally, with your house. So Zack, Ben,
Sure.
go ahead. Yeah.
I'll start.
Was
And, one thing that points out, one thing that in my head that kind of differentiates everything else is once I got there and Ben got off the air, their weekend met then started doing their on-air stuff. He was telling me how he spoke to the National Weather Service, and they're saying, look, we're looking at all the models. There could be 5 to 6 feet of water in this building, and where the KPLC is, it's in downtown Lake Charles. And 5 to 6 feet of water, even though they're close to the lake, they're not that close to the lake. So that's a large amount of water. And I think that's where it was like, okay, you probably need to start thinking about maybe leaving this, because that's not going to be we're not going to be able to broadcast at that point if you have 5 to 6 feet of water in this building. And I don't think it ever crossed anybody's mind about the tower. I remember one severe storm when I was working in Lake Charles. I remember one severe storm. I walked outside when it was really strong winds, and the winds were blowing through that tower.
Which we don't advise most people to do.
No. It was a severe storm technically, but it was actually it was one of those dry downbursts where
Way to walk it back.
That was a heat burst event. I remember
the
that.
heat burst. Yes, the heat burst. We had a heat burst, and we had 60, 70 miles per hour winds with no rain. It was just a heat burst. And I remember hearing the wind going through the tower. And that's the part where it's like realizing now after Laura how that tower fell. It's crazy to think about, but I'll kind of toss it back to Ben to let you sort of play the rest of that whole story out.
Yeah, I mean, that tower was built in the early 50s. It was actually there for Hurricane Audrey and all these hurricanes you think about in the past. So you think about, well, this tower is pretty strong if it stayed there for all that. So, yeah, I mean, it was in the back of our minds, but it wasn't necessarily our primary concern as far as getting out of the building. It was the flooding concern. It was the potential for us, with all of our operations being on the ground floor of the studio, of the station. All of our operations are on that first floor. We would be off the air and we would not be able to provide a service to our community. And we knew we had the technology available to us with WAFB and their digital studio that we could actually take our signal. We could take their signal directly through some of our routing systems that we have and go on the air directly to that. So we knew that was going to be our best option. At some point, that was probably going to go off the air as well if we started taking in water, but at least we would be safe. We would still be on the air. And I can't thank the folks at AFB enough because they set us up quickly. Their engineers got us on the air. I mean, almost immediately when we were there, they were already some folks that had taken over our broadcast, and they helped us with getting graphics built, getting things to where we could just almost seamlessly step in and have everything we needed to continue with the on-air side. So yeah, there was that. I think that made it a little bit easier, a lot easier on us, because otherwise we would have had major problems, continuing with the nonstop broadcast. But there were a few people that did stay. We had some people on our staff, John Bridges, Jillian Quarter, Brady Raynard. They stayed behind. They stayed in Lake Charles. They kind of hunkered down with some of the sheriff's department officials in the building there. They left the station. Thankfully, there was nobody in the station, but there were a couple people who did stay behind and got some footage for us. But as far as from the weather standpoint of the communications end, I don't really think it would have done us much good to stay there and try to continue to broadcast, because we probably wouldn't have been able to anyway. And I think our mission was to get the information out to the public and keep them safe and try to get as many reports as we could back from Lake Charles after the storm. And, that would have been more difficult as well with having no power. And then the other issue was the telecommunications side. We're down just trying to get cell phone, video, FaceTime and things like that. Even the day after, it was a challenge. So we were actually literally sending reporters from Baton Rouge to Lake Charles every day to run and do their packages and shoot video, tell the story, and then they would come back to Baton Rouge to get that on the air. So it was an intricate link that we had between AFB. For a while, I mean, we were only on Facebook Live because that's what it really had gotten down to. When our station went off the air, we weren't broadcasting. I believe at some point we were on the air close up until the time of the landfall, or actually after landfall, up till about, I believe, 12:30 or 1 in the morning is when we were essentially on the air until the tower fell into the building, because that's what essentially took us off the air, was that. But we had the generator backup, and the generator was actually still operating the next day when they went back into the building. There were still lights on in the building. They had to actually shut that down because so if it had not been for that, we would have probably stayed on the air, the entire time. But making the decision to get out obviously was the right thing, after we look back on that, because none of us want to have to leave our building that feel like is our job and our duty to get that information out. But, it could have been a bad outcome if we had stayed there, and Zack could attest to that, seeing the damage, even if we didn't take the flooding, which is, I think, what we wanted to talk about, was the storm surge as well, and that potential. For those who aren't familiar with our viewing areas, so we're more of a kind of a north to south oriented television market, whereas a lot of areas that go more east to west. Well, the bounds for Lake Charles is the Texas line. That's where you start into Beaumont. So literally Calcasieu Parish, north up to about Vernon Parish, and east to Jeff Davis and Allen are essentially our primary viewing area, because you have Lafayette off to the east. So the path this storm was taking, yes, it was a perfect path to affect every single parish in our viewing area. We're a small market, but we didn't have a single parish that was untouched, because you didn't have to go far east or west to kind of get out of that damage swath. You could go west over into Orange toward Beaumont, and the damage was minimal compared to what we dealt with as soon as you crossed over into Calcasieu Parish. Whereas if you started going east, when you started heading east of Jennings or over toward Crowley, the damage there was minimal as well. And some people, over there didn't even lose power. So it was a perfect path for, affecting literally every viewer in our viewing area, because we had substantial damage all the way up to Vernon Parish to the coastline. So there wasn't anyone that was untouched in our market by this storm.
And that includes you, Ben. Includes you, Zack. I think you were with Ben when he left his house for the last time. What was the result of that, Ben? I guess you were in the same boat as a lot of your viewers.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, there were a lot of people that lost their homes. Even today, and I was talking to a friend of mine about this just over the weekend. We were driving around looking at, how things have progressed over, the 6 to 7 months that it's been since the storm. And, it doesn't make sense to me as to why the storm decided to affect certain buildings and not others, because you can drive down the road and you can see a building that looked like it should have been destroyed that was left. Kind of like the home I'm in now. I moved in with a friend, and it's just a thousand wonders that his house wasn't damaged. And so you just kind of had to realize that this storm it didn't really make a whole lot of sense from the damage standpoint. Now with my home, I think even if you're evacuated from a hurricane, and I had hurricane shutters put on my house, I had them professionally made. They were thousands of dollars. I had my house boarded up, from every window, every door was boarded up. So I didn't leave expecting to not have a house to come back to. And I think that's the thing. Like, even if you're evacuating from a storm, you expect to have something to come back to. Barring if you lived on the immediate coastline, of Cameron, I wasn't expecting the storm surge issues to be, where I was located to be a major issue, because I was farther from the lake. So I was thinking, well, I'll probably have some roof leaks here. There'll probably be some roof leaks, but hopefully I'll have a house to come back to. So we boarded up and left. That was part of the deal, the day before it made landfall, because we all live here. We have homes. Our chief meteorologist, Wade Hampton, lived down the street from me. We were all making those last minute, looks and tours of our property to make sure things were shored up. And I made that last pass through that afternoon. And of course, I left my cat at the house, and I said, I'll be back to see you. We're getting out of town, because at that point, when we decided to leave, we didn't have time to go back and get things that we had left in the house, or things we would have taken with us otherwise. We stayed on the air as long as we could until it was to the point where we had to just get on the road and leave. So, at that, looking back at things, probably wouldn't have done anything differently, because it looked apparently to me like what happened with my instance with my house was there could have been, in that eye wall, there could have been something going on the micro scale level, like maybe a little tornado that did a lot of the damage to the house that was my house and my neighbor's house, because there were a lot of homes on my street that didn't have that type of damage. Most of them are still livable. So short of a tree falling on the house, for a lot of people, it was either a tree on a house, it was a roof that had been torn off, or in some instances, like with our downtown buildings, we had some that had total wall collapse and roof collapse in some of those old brick buildings. So that's what did a lot of the damage.
I think it's interesting that you brought that up. And I'd seen Reed Timmer, I'd seen some video of his recently that appeared to show mesovortices
Yes.
in Hurricane Laura. Zach, you want to talk about that a little bit? This is something that scientists discovered exist in these extreme hurricanes, beginning with Hurricane Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I remember right after the storm, everybody started going back, seeing the damage, and they're like, there must have been 100,000 tornadoes with this storm. And it's when you have to realize that when you have a hurricane this intense, I mean, this strong, and that eye wall, when you have 140, 150 miles per hour sustained winds, there are those things called mesovortices. And I think this was one of those extreme storms that produces those mesovortices. And that's just a meteorological way of saying, okay, small tornadoes in some senses, but it's not totally a tornadics type of cell that you think about during the spring months. And that's where, when you have that strong of winds blowing, they can easily speed up in some areas and slow down in other areas. And just having that strong wind gust, that's what does a lot of damage in these extreme storms.
So, we had Laura. Then on the New Orleans side, we had, I think it was around 10,000 evacuees from Lake Charles in New Orleans that we were trying to house in the middle of a pandemic. It was the exact nightmare we had talked about in all of our hurricane specials at the beginning of the season. You guys are devastated in Southwest Louisiana, and then here comes Delta.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that was almost like, is this real? Like, what is going on here? We had. We had feared, obviously, the possibility of another Gulf storm after the season we had dealing with storms like Beta. There was one, I believe Beta was one that we were a little bit concerned about at one point while we were still in Baton Rouge. And because it was just a mere idea of getting rain at that point was going to be a problem, much less another hurricane. So we were very concerned about problems with Delta, with the debris piles, because we're almost now, 7 months into the recovery and just now finishing up some of the final passes of the debris trucks. In fact, I can take you, if I had my FaceTime, I could show you where all the debris trucks are still parked over on 12th Street by the old Kroger over there. They're still lined up and they're still making rounds every day, picking up debris piles from Laura. So we have all this debris piled up on the side of the road. We have homes that are still tarped to this day, but at that point, we had some pretty crudely tarped roofs after Laura because people were just trying to protect what they could that were not going to hold up for another hurricane. So, yeah, now we're dealing with Delta, and it was a gut punch for sure, but it's like, what do you do? How do you prepare for another storm when you've already lost your home or you're not even moving back yet? So it's kind of like we're just telling people that here it comes again. And then Delta, had that potential to even be stronger than it was. Thankfully, it was just a 2 as it made landfall. But, we stayed for that storm. We stayed in the building. We were on the air for that. We took a few little hits here and there because of some of our rigging we had to do on our tower to get our signal out. But we didn't the building because at that point we knew we were going to be safe to stay, in the station. The tower, what was left of the tower, was only about 100 feet of it left, and it had already been fixed back from what had been taken out of the roof and everything like that. So we knew at that point we were going to be safe to stay there. What it was going to do to our city, we weren't quite sure because we knew about the flooding potential with Delta, especially with not having the drainage, what would get washed into the drains and the debris piles and the ditches in a lot of our neighborhoods were going to likely make that worse. So we were certainly a bit more concerned about flooding from Delta, and that's essentially what happened. It made another big hit on our area. A lot of areas and this is where it got interesting with Delta. A lot of people thought we had, with the hurricane claims with Laura, they were a lot easier to push through because it was all wind. We didn't have the water, but with Delta, it was just the opposite. So if a home had sustained damage in Laura and was waiting on things to get fixed, and then they had flooding from Delta, well, that was a whole nother insurance claim, and that would have been, if they didn't have flood insurance, not necessarily covered. So I don't really know what all the nuts and bolts went into that, but I know a lot of people had damage from Laura that didn't have damage from Delta, rather, that didn't have damage from Laura simply due to flooding. So it was kind of a 1-2 punch there for a lot of people. And of course, we know a lot of people don't have flood insurance.
Oh yeah, and so let's kind of wrap things up here with where Lake Charles is now. I believe FEMA has given assistance to just under 300,000 people between Delta and Laura, largely in Southwest Louisiana. There's probably been some other claims farther north in the state. You mentioned the debris piles. I mean, goodness gracious, folks in New Orleans know all about that after Katrina and the recovery that went on for so long. What does the city look like today, and what do you think going forward? I hate to even say it, as we enter another hurricane season in the next 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. Well, as far as the city, the landscape has changed. We've had so many trees uprooted that, it's just changed the whole landscape of our area. So that's been kind of tough, just seeing things that aren't there that used to be there. But as far as the damage goes, we still have a long way to go. I mean, as far as repairs to homes and roofs, I mean, a lot of our problem is we have so many damaged homes that it's just hard to get the workers to come out and do the work. They're usually stuck on a larger job if it's a roofing job. We have a few shingles still off the roof above my head here. We have a tarp on the roof of this house because it's just, we don't have a leak, so we're just kind of being put off, by the roofers. So it's just one of the things to where you drive around every day and it looks a little bit better every day because you see more debris that's being picked up. More people are, coming back. And that was one of the things that scared me was, are people going to move back here? They're going to want to live here again after this. And, people here are very resilient. Most people, it seems like they've moved back to Lake Charles, and I'm not sure about Cameron. That's a whole different problem down there because of just the amount of destruction. And then after what they had to deal with storms in the past. But for Lake Charles, people seem to be coming back. It seems like we're getting another restaurant opening up every couple of weeks, so that's encouraging when you start seeing these businesses want to rebuild, want to come back and be a part of the community. And that's what's making it, for me, encouraging, that I'm glad that I stayed here. I'm still here, obviously. But there's no doubt about it. And I'll credit Zack on this. The coverage that we provided, the word got out. We had no direct deaths from the hurricane attributed to the storm. It was all after the fact. It was either, we had a lot of deaths from heat-related injuries, from heat-related illnesses, from the improper use of generators, which ended up causing the large number of deaths we saw after the storm. But, I feel like people got the message and people got out, and I feel like that was all. Our job was complete at that point. Whenever we didn't have to get those reports of a large amounts of people dying from storm surge or something like that. So people took it seriously. They got out, and I haven't talked to a single person that told me they regretted evacuating for Laura after they came back. I talked to several people who stayed and wish they hadn't. Thankfully, they're alive, but I don't think that was a storm anybody regretted leaving for.
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Zack, Ben, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And Ben, I wish only the best for Southwest Louisiana and yourself as you guys continue to try and recover. Take care.
Thank you.
That'll do it for episode 5 of the podcast. A reminder that our audio podcast can be found on all your favorite podcast apps. And if you're not aware, we do have a video podcast as well. You can watch the videos by going to our website, fox8live.com/David. Stay safe, everybody. Until next time.